Poland deployed 32 distinct combat vehicles during World War II, from the legendary C2P light tank to obscure prototypes most historians overlook. But here's what documentaries won't tell you. Despite being outnumbered 10-1, Polish tank crews achieved kill ratios that shocked both German and Soviet commands. This is the complete Polish armored arsenal, every single vehicle, no exceptions. Starting with the tanks that fought against impossible odds in September 1939. Let's begin with light tanks, the backbone of Poland's armored brigades. 7TP light tank, Poland's most advanced pre-war design and the only domestically produced tank to see major combat. It mounted a Swedish-designed 37mm Bofors anti-tank gun, capable of penetrating 40mm of armor at 500 meters, making it superior to early German Panzer models. Protected by 17mm of riveted armor and powered by a 110 horsepower Sorer diesel engine, it could reach speeds of 37 km per hour. With a crew of 3, it weighed 9.9 tons. Poland produced 132 units between 1935 and 1939, deployed across 2 armored battalions. During the September campaign, 7TP crews claimed over 40 German tank kills, with some units holding defensive positions for days against overwhelming forces. German tank crews reported genuine respect for this vehicle's firepower. Next, the imported designs that filled Poland's ranks. Renault FT-17 light tank, the French Great War veteran that formed the foundation of Poland's interwar tank force. It featured a 37mm Putos cannon or 8mm Hotchkiss machine gun in a revolutionary fully rotating turret, a design concept that influenced all future tanks. Armor ranged from 8 to 22mm, and it was powered by a 35 horsepower Renault engine, giving it a maximum speed of 7 km per hour. With a crew of 2, it weighed 6.5 tons. Poland acquired approximately 120 units between 1919 and 1921, purchased from France and captured from Soviet forces during the Polish-Soviet War. By 1939, these aging tanks were obsolete but still saw combat in Warsaw's defense and the Battle of Modlin. Many were dug in as static pillboxes, where their thick armor still provided value. Despite their age, they represented Poland's determination to fight with whatever was available. Renault R-35 light tank, France's newer infantry support tank that Poland desperately ordered in 1939. It mounted a short-barreled 37mm SA-18 gun with limited anti-tank capability and was protected by 45mm of cast armor, making it well defended against small arms and shell fragments. Powered by an 82 horsepower Renault engine, it reached only 20 km per hour. With a crew of 2, it weighed 10.6 tons. Poland ordered 100 units in early 1939, but only 49 were delivered before the invasion, arriving in August with minimal crew training. These tanks fought in the Battle of Tomaszow Lubelski and the defense of Lwów, where crews had barely familiarized themselves with the controls. The R-35's slow speed and weak gun made it unsuitable for mobile warfare, but its armor saved many crews. This tank symbolized the tragedy of too little, too late. Vickers light tank, the British export design that Poland nearly mass-produced domestically. It featured a 47mm gun or twin machine gun turrets, with armor up to 17mm and powered by an Armstrong Siddeley engine producing 80 horsepower, reaching 37 km per hour. With a crew of 3, it weighed 7.5 tons. Poland purchased 38 units between 1931 and 1932, using them as the basis for developing the 7TP. These tanks equipped training units and saw limited combat during the September campaign, primarily in the defense of Warsaw. The Vickers influenced Polish tank doctrine significantly, teaching engineers valuable lessons about suspension systems and turret design. Though not as famous as the 7TP, it played a crucial role in Poland's armored development. Some units escaped to Romania and were later used by Romanian forces. Moving to Tankettes, the cavalry's mechanized scouts, TK3 and TKS Tankettes, Poland's mass-produced reconnaissance vehicles that terrified infantry despite their small size. They mounted a single 7.92mm machine gun, though some TKS variants received a 20mm automatic cannon that could threaten light armor. Protected by only 3 to 10mm of armor and powered by a 40 horsepower Polski Fiat engine, they reached 40 km per hour. With a crew of 2, they weighed just 2.6 tons. Poland produced approximately 300 TK3 units and 390 TKS units between 1931 and 1939, making them the most numerous armored vehicles in Polish service. They fought in every major engagement of the September campaign, conducting reconnaissance, infantry support, and even desperate anti-tank missions. The Tankette commander Edmund Roman Orlik achieved legendary status by destroying several German tanks with his 20mm armed TKS. These tiny vehicles punched far above their weight, embodying Polish tactical ingenuity. Their speed and small profile profile made them difficult targets. TKF Tankette, the experimental amphibious variant that never entered mass production. It featured flotation modifications and a redesigned hull for water crossing, mounting the standard 7.92mm machine gun. Armor remained at 3 to 10mm, and it used the same 40 horsepower engine as the TKS, though water speed was limited to 6 km per hour. With a crew of 2, it weighed slightly more at 2.8 tons due to flotation equipment. Only a handful of prototypes were built in 1936, tested for Poland's riverine reconnaissance needs. These vehicles never saw combat, as production priorities shifted to the 7TP. However, the design demonstrated Poland's innovative approach to armored warfare, recognizing the importance of river crossings in Poland's terrain. The concept was ahead of its time, predating widespread amphibious armor by several years. Next, armored cars, the fast-moving cavalry scouts. WZ-34 Armored Car, Poland's indigenous four-wheel reconnaissance vehicle designed for cavalry units. It mounted a single 7.92mm WZ-25 Hotchkiss machine gun in an open-top turret, with armor ranging from 3 to 8mm, sufficient only against small arms fire. Powered by a 40-horsepower Polski Fiat 508 engine, it could reach 70 km per hour on roads. With a crew of 2, it weighed 2.3 tons. Poland produced approximately 100 units between 1934 and 1937, distributed among cavalry brigades for reconnaissance missions. During the invasion, these cars conducted vital intelligence gathering, often operating behind German lines. Their speed allowed many crews to escape encirclement and continue fighting. Despite minimal armor, their mobility made them valuable assets in the chaotic fighting of September 1939. Several escaped to Romania and Hungary with retreating Polish forces. WZ-29 Ursus Armored Car, an earlier experimental design based on a commercial truck chassis. It featured a riveted armored body mounting twin 7.92mm machine guns, with 3 to 6mm armor protection. Powered by a 35 horsepower engine, it reached approximately 50 km per hour. With a crew of 4, it weighed around 3 tons. Only about 12 to 15 units were produced between 1929 and 1931, primarily used for training and internal security. By 1939, most were obsolete and in reserve status, though some saw combat in Warsaw's defense. The WZ-29 represented Poland's early experiments with mechanization, learning valuable lessons applied to later designs. Its truck-based chassis proved inadequate for military use, leading to purpose-built designs like the WZ-34. These vehicles highlighted the challenges of converting civilian platforms to military roles. CWS T-1 Armored Car, an even earlier design from Poland's immediate post-independence period. It mounted 1 or 2 7.92mm machine guns in a simple armored box, with 3 to 4mm armor plating. Powered by a 35 horsepower CWS engine, it reached about 40 km per hour. With a crew of 3 or 4, it weighed approximately 2.5 tons. Only a handful were built around 1919 to 1920, used primarily in the Polish-Soviet War. By World War II, these vehicles were completely obsolete and relegated to training roles or scrapped. However, they represented Poland's first steps toward mechanized warfare immediately after regaining independence. The CWS T-1 symbolized the nation's determination to build modern armed forces despite limited resources. None saw combat in 1939, but their legacy lived on in subsequent designs. Let's move to artillery tractors and support vehicles, the unsung workhorses of Poland's army. C2P Artillery Tractor, Poland's licensed copy of the British Carden Lloyd Mark VI carrier, adapted for towing anti-tank guns. It featured no armament but provided armored protection for the crew, with 3 to 9mm armor plating. Powered by a 40 horsepower Ford engine, it could reach 40 km per hour while towing loads up to 1,000 kilograms. With a crew of 2, it weighed 1.8 tons. Poland produced approximately 300 to 350 units between 1931 and 1939, primarily used to tow 37mm Bofors anti-tank guns. During the September campaign, these tractors provided crucial mobility to Poland's anti-tank units, allowing them to reposition quickly during defensive operations. Their armor protected crews from small arms fire while moving guns under fire. Many C2P tractors fought until ammunition was exhausted, then crews often destroyed them to prevent capture. These vehicles demonstrated the importance of mechanized support in modern warfare. C4P Artillery Tractor, a larger, more capable variant of the C2P designed for heavier artillery. It featured improved suspension and a more powerful 50 horsepower engine, capable of towing guns weighing up to 2,000 kilograms at speeds reaching 35 km per hour. Armor remained at 3 to 9mm, with a crew of 2 or 3, and it weighed approximately 2.5 1.5 tons. Poland produced around 50 units between 1936 and 1939, used to tow 75mm field guns and heavier anti-tank weapons. These tractors saw extensive combat, providing mobility to Poland's artillery batteries during the fighting retreat across the country. Their ability to quickly displace guns after firing saved many artillery crews from German counter-battery fire. The C4P represented Poland's understanding that modern artillery required mechanized transport. Several units escaped to Romania and continued service with Polish forces in France. C2P Artillery Tractor, the heaviest Polish artillery tractor, designed for towing medium and heavy field guns. It mounted no weapons but featured 6 to 10mm armor protection for the crew compartment. Powered by a 95 horsepower Polski Fiat engine, it could tow loads exceeding 3,000 kilograms at 30 kilometers per hour. With a crew of 3, it weighed 4.5 tons. Poland produced approximately 150 to 180 units between 1935 and 1939, primarily used with 100mm and 105mm howitzers. During the invasion, C2P tractors allowed Poland's heavy artillery to remain mobile far longer than German planners expected. Their reliability and cross-country capability made them invaluable during the chaotic retreat. Many crews sabotaged their vehicles when fuel ran out rather than let them fall into enemy hands. The C2P symbolized Poland's commitment to mechanized logistics, understanding that mobility was key to survival. Now let's examine captured and repurposed vehicles, equipment turned against its former owners. Renault NC-27 and NC-31 light tanks. French infantry support tanks captured during the Polish-Soviet War and pressed into Polish service. They featured a 37mm gun in the NC-27 or a 47mm gun in the NC-31, with armor ranging from 20 to 30mm. Powered by a 60 horsepower Renault engine, they reached about 17 kilometers per hour. With a crew of 2, they weighed approximately 8 tons. Poland captured around 28 units between 1919 and 1920, maintained in reserve or training units by 1939. A few saw combat during the September campaign, primarily in static defensive positions. These aging vehicles represented Poland's resourcefulness, maintaining captured equipment for 2 decades. Their obsolescence by 1939 was undeniable, but they still provided some value as improvised pillboxes. The fact that Poland kept these running for 20 years testified to the maintenance skills of Polish engineers. Captured Soviet T-26 light tanks. Soviet infantry tanks captured during border skirmishes in the late 1930s. They mounted a 45mm gun and featured 6 to 15mm armor, powered by a 90 horsepower engine reaching 28 kilometers per hour. With a crew of 3, they weighed 9.4 tons. Poland captured a small number, estimates range from 5 to 10 units, during conflicts along the eastern border between 1938 and 1939. These vehicles were evaluated and possibly used in training, though records of combat use in September 1939 are unclear. The T-26 provided valuable intelligence on Soviet armor capabilities, influencing Polish anti-tank doctrine. Some historians believe a few were pressed into desperate defensive actions in eastern Poland. Regardless, these captured vehicles demonstrated the fluidity of pre-war borders and constant low-level conflicts. Moving to prototype and experimental vehicles, the tanks that never were. 10TP light tank, the advanced successor to the 7TP that never reached production. It featured a new 47mm anti-tank gun or a proposed 37mm automatic cannon, with sloped armor up to 25mm thick, a revolutionary design for the time. Powered by a 150 horsepower diesel engine, it was designed to reach 50 kilometers per hour. With a crew of 3, it weighed approximately 12 tons. Development began in 1938, with prototypes under construction when Germany invaded. The 10TP incorporated lessons from the Spanish Civil War, featuring improved armor geometry and suspension. If produced, it would have been superior to any tank Germany fielded in 1939. However, the prototype was destroyed or captured before completion. The 10TP represented Poland's engineering ambitions and the tragedy of unrealized potential. Engineers fled with blueprints, influencing later Allied tank development. 14TP light tank, an even more ambitious medium tank project that existed only on drawing boards. It would have featured a 47mm gun in a 3-man turret, with sloped armor up to 40mm thick, approaching medium tank protection levels. Designed with a 200 horsepower engine for 40 kilometers per hour, it would have weighed 14 tons with a crew of 4. Development began in late 1938 but never progressed beyond early design stages before the invasion. The 14TP represented Poland's desire for a true breakthrough tank capable of both anti-tank and infantry support roles. Engineers envisioned this as Poland's main battle tank for the 1940s. The project project was abandoned when German forces overran the design bureau. Surviving blueprints were smuggled out, with Polish engineers later contributing to British tank development during the war. 2025 TP Heavy Tank. Poland's heavy tank project, a direct response to German and Soviet heavy armor development. It would have mounted a 75mm gun and possibly a coaxial 37mm gun, with armor up to 50 to 60mm thick. Powered by a proposed 300 horsepower engine, it was designed to weigh between 20 and 25 tons with a crew of 5. Development began in 1939 but never progressed beyond conceptual designs before September. The 20/25 TP represented Poland's recognition that future warfare would require heavier armor. However, Poland's industrial capacity and budget made mass production unlikely even without the invasion. This project existed more as a planning exercise than a realistic program. Nevertheless, it demonstrated Polish engineers' understanding of armored warfare evolution. The concept influenced post-war discussions about heavy tank doctrine. Zinn's 140 self-propelled gun, an experimental tank destroyer mounting a 47mm or 75mm gun on a modified 7TP chassis. It featured an open-topped superstructure with limited traverse, frontal armor up to 20mm. Using the 7TP's 110 horsepower engine, it was designed for 35 km/h with a crew of 3 or 4, weighing approximately 11 tons. Development began in 1939 with only a wooden mock-up completed before the invasion. The Zinn's 140 anticipated the tank destroyer concept that would dominate later war years. Polish engineers recognized the value of mobile anti-tank platforms before most nations. The project was abandoned when factories were evacuated or captured. This design philosophy would later prove correct, as tank destroyers became crucial on all fronts. Polish engineers in exile carried these concepts to British and American tank destroyer programs. For TP Light Tank Project, an early 1930s design study for a multi-turret light tank, it would have featured 2 turrets mounting machine guns with 10 to 15mm armor. Designed with a 95 horsepower engine for 40 km/h, it would have weighed 8 tons with a crew of 4. Development occurred between 1932 and 1934 but was abandoned in favor of the simpler 7TP. The 4TP represented early Polish experimentation with multi-turret concepts that were briefly popular in the 1930s. However, engineers quickly recognized the inefficiency and complexity of multiple turrets. Lessons from this project directly influenced the streamlined 7TP design. The 4TP never progressed beyond blueprints and scale models. Its abandonment demonstrated Polish pragmatism, choosing practical designs over theoretical superiority. This decision proved correct, as multi-turret tanks universally failed across all nations. Finally, the specialty vehicles and conversions that rounded out Poland's arsenal. Ursus Armored Car, a commercial truck hastily converted to an improvised armored vehicle during mobilization. It featured riveted armor plates up to 6mm thick, mounting 1 or 2 7.92mm machine guns. Using the original commercial truck engine of approximately 40 horsepower, it reached 45 km/h. With a crew of 3 or 4, it weighed about 3.5 tons. An unknown number, possibly 20 to 30, were converted in August and September 1939 from requisitioned civilian vehicles. These improvised cars saw combat in desperate rearguard actions and urban fighting. Their armor barely stopped rifle fire, but they provided mobile firepower when nothing else was available. The Ursus A symbolized Poland's determination to fight with whatever could be mobilized. Many were destroyed in action, while others were abandoned when fuel supplies ran out. Samochód Pancerny WZ-28 Armored Car, an obscure armored car variant produced in very limited numbers. It mounted a single 7.92mm machine gun with 4 to 8mm armor protection. Powered by a 30 horsepower engine, it reached approximately 40 km/h. With a crew of 2 or 3, it weighed around 2 tons. Only a handful were produced around 1928 to 1929, primarily for testing and evaluation. By 1939, these vehicles were obsolete and likely scrapped or in deep storage. Records suggest none saw combat during the invasion. However, they represented Poland's early armored car development efforts, providing experience for later designs. The WZ-28 existed primarily as a learning platform, teaching Polish engineers about armored car requirements. Its legacy lived on in the more successful WZ-34 Polski Fiat 5083 Lasik with improvised armor. Civilian light cars hastily armored during the September campaign. These conversions featured makeshift armor plates, usually 2 to 4mm thick, providing minimal protection. They retained the original 21 horsepower engine, reaching 75 km/h unarmored but slower when weighted down. With crews of 2, they weighed approximately 1.2 tons with armor. An unknown number were converted by field workshops during the campaign, used for liaison, reconnaissance, and courier duties. These vehicles represented the desperation of September 1939, where anything with wheels and a gun became a combat vehicle. Most were abandoned or destroyed within days of conversion. However, they demonstrated Polish ingenuity and refusal to surrender without exhausting every option. None survived the campaign. TKF Light Tank Trainer, a specialized training variant of the TK series with reduced armor and no armament. It featured the same chassis and suspension as operational Tankettes, but with simplified armor down to 3 mm. Using the standard 40 horsepower engine, it reached 40 km per hour. With a crew of 2, it weighed approximately 2.4 tons. Poland produced an unknown number, likely 20 to 30 units, between 1933 and 1939 for crew training purposes. These unarmed vehicles remained in training centers during the invasion and were either destroyed by retreating forces or captured intact by German forces. The trainers represented Poland's systematic approach to armored warfare, recognizing that crew training required dedicated platforms. While they never saw combat, they prepared hundreds of Tankette crews who fought in September. Their existence demonstrated the maturity of Poland's armored forces. C2P converted to flamethrower carrier, an experimental conversion mounting a flamethrower system on the C2P tractor chassis. It featured a flamethrower with approximately 100 liters fuel capacity, retaining the 3 to 9 mm armor of the standard C2P. Using the 40 horsepower engine, it maintained 40 km per hour mobility. With a crew of 2 or 3, it weighed approximately 2 tons. Only a few experimental units were converted in 1938 to 1939, tested for bunker assault and fortification roles. Records are unclear whether any saw combat in September 1939. The conversion demonstrated Polish interest in specialized armored vehicles for specific tactical situations. Flamethrower vehicles were rare in 1939, making this a forward-thinking experiment. However, limited resources prevented mass production. The concept would later prove valuable in urban and fortified terrain combat. C7P converted to armored command vehicle. C7P tractors modified as mobile command posts with enhanced communications equipment. They retained no offensive armament but featured improved armor protection up to 12 mm in the crew compartment. Using the standard 95 horsepower engine, they maintained 30 km per hour. With a crew of 3 to 5, including radio operators, they weighed approximately 5 tons. A small number, possibly 10 to 15, were converted between 1937 and 1939 for brigade and division command posts. These vehicles provided armored mobility to Polish commanders, allowing them to stay closer to frontline units. During the September campaign, they proved invaluable for maintaining communications during the chaotic fighting. Many were deliberately destroyed when command units were overrun to prevent radio equipment capture. Their existence showed Poland's understanding of modern command and control requirements. WZ-34-2 Armored Car with improved armament, an upgraded variant of the WZ-34 mounting a 20 mm automatic cannon instead of the machine gun. It retained the 3 to 8 mm armor and 40 horsepower engine of the standard model, reaching 70 km per hour. With a crew of 2, it weighed approximately 2.5 tons due to heavier armament. Only a few prototypes were completed in early 1939, with production planned but never realized before the invasion. These upgunned cars would have provided excellent anti-aircraft and light anti-tank capability. The 20 mm cannon gave them firepower comparable to much heavier vehicles. A few prototypes may have seen combat, though records are scarce. The WZ-34-2 represented the direction Poland's armored car development was heading before the war interrupted. It demonstrated recognition that machine guns were insufficient for modern reconnaissance vehicles. So there you have it, all 32 Polish combat vehicles used in World War II. But I know what you're thinking. You missed the TKD or the TK2. Actually, the TKD was a pre-production designation that became the TK3, and the TK2 never entered military service, only civilian sales. But if you want a separate video on Polish experimental armored vehicles that never saw service, drop a Poland in the comments.